The sand was blistering hot on my skin, even through my clothes. We had been digging for months, the Egyptian sun burning down on us each day, but today felt different. Today the air had a stillness to it, a strange quiet hanging over the dig site. We were deep within the Valley of the Kings, searching for something new, something lost. And then we found it. A concealed entrance, hidden beneath layers of rock and dust, opened into darkness. It was not grand, not like the tombs we had already uncovered, but smaller, more secret. Hieroglyphs covered the stone doorway, symbols we recognized, warnings clear as day. They spoke of a guardian, of a curse, of a wrath not to be disturbed. The others, my team, whispered amongst themselves, their voices hushed, with a mix of excitement and fear. We'd seen these warnings before in other tombs, and we had always proceeded. History and discovery, that was our purpose. The entrance gave way to a passage, sloping downwards into the earth. The air inside was instantly colder, a damp chill that raised goosebumps on my arms. Our lamps cut through the blackness, revealing walls covered in more carvings, more warnings. Undeterred, we pressed on, deeper and deeper into the unknown. The passage opened into a chamber, a small room dominated by a large stone sarcophagus in its center. It was plain, undecorated. Unlike the ornate coffins of pharaohs we had unearthed previously, this simplicity made it all the more unsettling. Dust lay thick on the sarcophagus lid. With gloved hands we began to move it, the stone grating against stone, a horrible screech echoing in the confined space. It felt heavier than it should, resistant. Finally, with a final push, the lid slid aside, revealing the inside. It was empty, or so we thought. The inside of the sarcophagus was not smooth, not polished. It was scarred, covered in lines, deep grooves etched into the stone, scratch marks, long, frantic scratch marks, as if something had been trapped inside, struggling to get out. But there was nothing now, just the empty stone vessel and the chilling evidence of past desperation. A sense of something profoundly wrong settled upon us in that moment. The silence in the chamber became absolute. Then it came. Not from inside the sarcophagus, but from somewhere else, from the darkness beyond the small room, a sound that ripped through the silence, a high-pitched shriek that burrowed into our ears and straight into our bones. It was a scream of pure agony, of inhuman rage. It was a sound that spoke of centuries of torment. From the opening of another hallway, just beyond the chamber, something emerged. At first, just a hand. A bandaged hand, dry and brittle, the linen wrapping stained and yellowed with age. It reached out from the darkness, fingers crooked and stiff, grasping at the air. Then more of it came. Slowly, horribly, it pulled itself from the doorway. A figure wrapped head to toe in bandages, ancient and decaying. A mummy. Not the preserved remains we had expected, but something else entirely. This was not still, not peaceful. This was animated, enraged, filled with a terrible, unholy energy. Its head lolled, its limbs moved with a jerky, unnatural motion. The bandages were torn in places, revealing glimpses of dried, blackened flesh beneath. An odor, sharp and foul, filled the chamber, the smell of dust, decay, and something far worse. It stood there, in the doorway, its bandaged head lifting, facing us. An opening appeared in the wrappings around its face, a dark void where its mouth should be. And then it screamed again, a raw, piercing sound that shattered the lamps and plunged the chamber into near darkness, only the faintest light remaining from the entrance passage. Panic erupted. We scrambled back, stumbling over each other in our haste to escape. The mummy lurched forward, moving faster than anything so ancient should be able to. It came after us. Down the passage we fled, the screams of the creature echoing behind us, growing louder, always gaining. The cold air of the tomb became colder still, charged with a terror that froze the blood in our veins. One of my team, young Thomas, tripped and fell. Before anyone could reach him, the mummy was upon him. A sickening sound, a crunch of bone and a strangled gasp, then silence. We didn't stop, we couldn't stop. We ran, blindly, desperately. The image of Thomas falling burned into our minds. The passage seemed to stretch on forever, turning and twisting, a maze in the dark. The screams were closer now, the shuffling, dragging sound of the mummy's feet right behind us. I could feel its presence, a coldness, a malevolence that reached out and touched us even from a distance. Another scream, closer this time, and another of my team cried out, disappearing into the darkness behind me. I dared not look back, I just ran. My breath burning in my chest, my legs aching, my heart pounding against my ribs. The air was thick with dust and the stench of decay. making it hard to breathe. I could see the entrance now, a faint square of daylight at the end of the passage. Hope surged through me, a desperate, fleeting hope. I pushed myself harder, stumbling, almost falling, driven by pure instinct to survive. I burst out of the tomb entrance, collapsing onto the hot sand, gasping for air, the burning sun a painful relief on my skin. I scrambled to my feet, looking back at the dark opening, expecting, fearing to see it emerge. But there was nothing, only the dark entrance, silent and still. I stood there shaking alone. The others, my team, they were gone. Taken by something ancient, something monstrous, unleashed from the depths of the earth. The sun beat down, the sand burned, the valley was silent, but in my ears I could still hear the screams, and from the dark mouth of the tomb I felt something watching. It was my shift for the night at the museum. Quiet, you see, after all the daytime crowds have gone home. Just me and the echo of my own boots on the stone floors. Round and round I go, checking rooms, making sure all is as it should be. Most nights nothing much happens, just the usual stillness of old things in a building built to keep them safe. Tonight I was in the Egypt rooms. Places like this always feel a bit different in the dark. All those old gods and dead kings, their stories still hanging in the air. I moved between the glass cases, my torch beam cutting paths through the gloom. Statues stood rigid, their stone eyes fixed on places I could not see. Wall paintings showed scenes of lives lived ages ago, frozen in time. Then I got to the pharaoh exhibit, the one they were all talking about. This wasn't just any old mummy. This was supposed to be someone unknown, someone new. They said the body was in amazing shape, all wrapped up and perfect, just as they found it in the sand. They had put it in a special case, all glass and sealed tight, to keep it just so for everyone to see. I shone my torch on the case. It was big, bigger than you might think. Inside you could see the shape of the mummy, all bundled in linen. The colour was dark, almost brown from age and whatever they used to preserve it. It looked peaceful, still, like it had been asleep for a very, very long time. But something was odd. I stopped and looked properly. The glass of the case, it was not clear. Not as clear as it should be. It looked hazy, like someone had breathed on it, but from the inside. That was not right at all. The case was sealed. Nothing from inside should get out, and nothing from outside should get in. I moved closer, my torch beam fixed on the foggy patch. It was there on the front panel, right in front of where the mummy's face would be, a sort of cloudiness on the inside of the glass. I touched the outside, cold and smooth. The fog was definitely inside. How could that be? I walked around the case, checking all the edges, all the seals. Everything looked as it should. Nothing broken, nothing loose. The case was still properly sealed as far as I could tell with my eyes. But the fog was there, inside. It made no sense. I thought maybe it was just condensation. Museums can get a bit damp, especially at night. But condensation is usually on the outside. And it does not just appear in one patch like a breath on glass. This was different. This was like something inside the case was making it happen. But what could be inside, apart from the mummy? And mummies don't breathe, do they? A little bit of chill ran down my back. Not a proper fright, more of a uncomfortable feeling. Like when you know something is just not quite right, even if you cannot put your finger on why. I stepped back from the case, still shining my torch at the foggy bit. It did not go away. It stayed there, a cloudy mark on the clear glass, inside the sealed case with the ancient mummy. The next day things were different. The day staff were all buzzing about something. I went to find out what was up. It was the security team. They had been looking at the night tapes, the cameras that watch over the museum when no one else is there. Routine stuff, they said. Just checking everything was sound. But they had found something. On the tape for the Pharaoh exhibit room. They showed it to me on a screen in their office. Black and white picture, a bit grainy, but clear enough. There was the glass case in the dark. Then the picture seemed to jump, a little distortion in the image, like a flicker. They played it again and again, each time the same flicker, the same jump in the picture. They zoomed in, made the picture bigger on the screen, and then I understood why everyone was talking. It was the mummy's hand. Just for a split second, in that flicker of picture distortion, you could see it. The fingers, they moved. Not much, just a twitch, a tiny little jerk, but it was there, on the tape. The mummy's fingers inside the sealed glass case had twitched in the night. The room went quiet in the security office. No one said anything for a moment. We all just watched the tape again, seeing the tiny finger twitch on the still dark screen. The head of security, a woman with a no-nonsense way about her, said they needed to look at the case. Properly look. Not just from the outside. They needed to open it, see what was going on inside. She said she would get a researcher, someone who knew about these things, to come and do it properly, so they got Dr. Armitage. She was an expert on ancient Egypt and all that stuff. She came down to the museum looking serious and professional. She went straight to the Pharaoh exhibit with the security head and a couple of others. I was asked to come along too, to watch, just in case. Dr. Armitage looked at the case. She looked at the foggy patch on the glass. She listened to what the security people had found on the tape. She circled the case slowly, examining every part of it. She asked questions, proper expert questions, about how it was sealed, about the air inside, about everything. Then she said it had to be opened, carefully. She got special tools, gloves, all sorts of things. They cleared the area around the case, made sure no one else could get too close. It felt really important, like something big was about to happen. A sort of hush fell over the room. Slowly, Dr. Armitage started to undo the seals on the case. It was not easy. They were made to be airtight. She worked bit by bit with great care. You could hear the faint hiss of air as the seals broke one after another. The tension in the room seemed to tighten with each little sound. Finally, the last seal was undone. Dr. Armitage paused, took a breath, then with a nod to the others, she lifted the top part of the glass case. It came away with a soft sigh. The inside of the case was open to the air. We all leaned forward to look. The first thing I noticed was the smell, a dry, dusty smell, like old cloth and earth. Then my eyes went to the mummy itself. It was there in the center of the case, still wrapped in its linen bandages, just as it had been, but something was different, very different. The linen, it was coming undone, not in a big dramatic way, but little by little, like threads pulling loose. Strands of the wrapping were hanging down, unraveling from the body beneath. It was as if the mummy was unwinding itself. Dr. Armitage gasped. She reached out a gloved hand very slowly towards the unraveled linen. She touched a loose end, and it came away easily in her fingers. She pulled gently, and more linen came with it, unspooling from the mummy's form. She kept pulling. Carefully, methodically, the linen kept coming in longer and longer strips. It was going on, unraveling from the body like a roll of bandage being unwound. We watched, silent, as the linen piled up around the base of the case, more and more of it. And as the linen came away, bit by bit, it revealed what was underneath, or rather what was not underneath. Because as the last of the wrappings unspooled and fell away, there was nothing there, just the inside of the coffin, empty, completely, utterly empty. The linen wrappings had been around nothing at all. The coffin was bare, no mummy, just empty space. Empty. The old museum always gave me the creeps, especially at night. I was the night guard, and my job was simple. Walk the halls, make sure nothing goes missing, and try not to think about the dusty relics and forgotten gods. I started my rounds, the beam of my torch cutting through the dark. The place was silent, or so I believed. It began with the footsteps. Not right next to me, but far away, near the Egyptian exhibit. I stopped, listening. Then a murmur, like many people whispering, but I couldn't make out any words. I moved towards the sound. The footsteps stopped, but the whispering continued, soft and insistent. As I approached the exhibit, I noticed something odd. The display cases seemed jumbled. A golden mask lay on the floor, away from its stand. A vase had toppled over, scattering pottery shards. The statues, tall and imposing, were all facing the exit. It was as if they were trying to leave. My pulse quickened. I knew I hadn't been the one to do this. I pulled out my radio, my hands shaky, and reported what I found. Possible disturbance, Egyptian exhibit, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Objects moved, statues facing outward, requesting backup. The voice on the other end crackled, "Back up en route! Check the security cameras!" I made my way to the security office, my torch beam dancing across the walls. I rewound the footage from the cameras in the Egyptian exhibit. What I watched made my blood run cold. Shapes, darker than the dark, flitted through the halls. They were indistinct, almost translucent, but they were there. They darted between the exhibits, their forms twisting and reforming. When the lights flickered on, they vanished, leaving the objects scattered and disturbed. The footage was silent, but I knew somehow that those shapes were the source of the whispers. I watched them for what felt like ages, rewinding, pausing, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. They were like figures from a nightmare, things that should not exist. I couldn't tear my gaze from the screen. The shapes danced around one object in particular, a newly unearthed sarcophagus brought in just last week. It was massive, ornate, and supposedly untouched since it was sealed thousands of years ago. Suddenly the video feed cut out, replaced by static. I tried to reboot the system, but nothing happened. The screens remained blank. I was alone, in the dark, with whatever those things were. I decided I couldn't stay put. I had to see if the disturbance was contained to the Egyptian exhibit. My steps were lighter as I made my way back through the halls, my torch shaking. Each shadow seemed to hold something unseen. Each echo seemed like a whisper. I got to the Egyptian exhibit and immediately noticed something. The sarcophagus wasn't as it was. The lid, which had been firmly sealed, was now ajar. A dark fissure ran along its edge, as if something had forced its way out from inside. My breath caught in my throat. I crept closer, the beam of my torch trembling. I wasn't sure what I expected to find, but nothing could have prepared me for what I actually saw. The sarcophagus was empty. The grand reopening of the Blackwood Natural History Museum was a date circled in Sharpie on the calendar of our small town. A new wing, dedicated entirely to the life and work of Silas Blackwood himself, the museum's original collector, was the main attraction. I'd volunteered to help with the setup, mostly because I'd always had a strange fascination with the place, particularly its extensive taxidermy collection. The main hall of the new wing was impressive. Dioramas recreated Blackwood's expeditions to far-flung corners of the globe. Animals frozen in time populated meticulously crafted habitats. A polar bear mid-roar, a pride of lions stalking prey, a flock of exotic birds frozen in vibrant flight. It was all quite wonderful, but also I couldn't help but get a strange feeling. It started subtly, a twitch in the corner of my eye when passing a particularly lifelike fox, an inexplicable chill which ran down my spine as I walked beneath the towering giraffe. These feelings intensified as the day progressed. Later that week, news spread through the museum staff like wildfire. A forensic team brought in to assess the structural integrity of some of the older displays had made a disturbing discovery. Beneath the expertly crafted skin of a seemingly ordinary badger, they'd uncovered human bones. The museum director, a stern woman named Davies, addressed us. Her face betrayed a deep concern which she tried to mask with professionalism, but the news was out. An investigation was underway. The new wing was closed until further notice. The investigation quickly escalated. The badger wasn't an isolated incident. The forensic team moved from exhibit to exhibit. With each passing day, the unspoken horror in the air grew. Beneath the skin of the majestic stag, more bones. Within the belly of the stoic wolf, the same grim discovery. It became clear that Silas Blackwood, the celebrated naturalist, was something else entirely. He wasn't just preserving nature, he was twisting it, corrupting it with something deeply sinister. I began spending my evenings poring over Blackwood's journals, which were stored in the museum archive. The neat, precise script detailed his expeditions, his observations of wildlife, and his growing obsession with the concept of preservation. At some point, the entries took a turn. A darkness crept into his words. He wrote of transcending the limitations of mortality, of finding a way to immortalize the essence of life itself. The human remains, according to the forensic reports, were of varying ages and origins. Some were local townspeople who had disappeared without a trace over the decades. Others seemed to come from much further afield. Blackwood's collecting trips, it seemed, were not solely focused on animals. The exhibits themselves became grotesque monuments to his madness, a family of bears posed in a seemingly natural tableau. A closer inspection revealed that the baby bear was in fact a child, its small skull carefully fitted within the animal's empty cranium. A vibrant parrot perched on a branch contained the delicate bones of a woman's hand. Work at the museum turned into a waking nightmare. Every day brought more grim revelations. The police cordoned off the new wing. The once grand dioramas were dismantled, each animal carcass pulled apart with clinical precision, revealing the human remains hidden within. The most disturbing discovery was the centerpiece of the Blackwood exhibit, a large tableau depicting a hunting scene in the African savannah. Lions surrounded a fallen zebra, their jaws open in a silent roar. Inside each lion, the bones of a different person. But the zebra, it was a complete skeleton of a young man, positioned as prey. Davies was rarely seen. Her office door remained shut. The remaining staff moved about like ghosts, the joy sucked out of our work. The museum, once a place of wonder, had become a tomb. One day, driven by some morbid curiosity, I found myself drawn back to Blackwood's journals. I opened one at random and found a drawing, a detailed anatomical sketch. It was of a human body, flayed and meticulously labelled, every muscle and sinew exposed. But it wasn't the drawing itself that made my blood run cold. It was the inscription scrawled beneath the image in Blackwood's unmistakable hand, "The canvas awaits." I turned the page. Another sketch, this one of a large bird of prey, its wings outstretched, and underneath another inscription, "Soon I shall fly again." A cold dread settled over me. I closed the journal, my hands were shaking. I walked out of the archive, back into the silent museum. I passed the empty dioramas, the skeletons of the exhibits standing like macabre monuments. I passed the main hall with its towering displays, now stripped bare. I looked up at the giraffe. It towered above me, its neck reaching towards the high ceiling. I stared at it for a long, silent moment and felt a strange sensation. Something wasn't right. I moved closer, my heart pounding in my chest. I reached out and touched its leg. The skin felt cold and smooth, too smooth. I ran my hand along its flank and noticed something that had previously escaped my attention. A seam, a perfectly disguised seam, running along the length of its body. I pushed against the seam and the skin gave way. I peered inside and all I could see was darkness. A hollow cavity the size of a human body, and then from within the darkness I could feel it. The new exhibit arrived a week ago. It was the talk of the museum, of course, a real mummy, unearthed from some forgotten place and brought here to us. The historians were excited. They spoke of rare finds and learning from the past. They brushed off any whispers about curses or bad luck. Silly old stories, they called them. Superstition. The mummy went into a special room, all glass and lights. It looked quite still, just lying there in its bandages. People came to look, lots of people. The museum was busier than it had been for ages. Everyone wanted to see the mummy. Then people started to get unwell. A few not many, just sniffles and feeling tired. Winter bugs, some said, but it was not winter, it was warm outside. These were not winter bugs. More people became ill. It was like something spreading, not a cough or a sneeze kind of spread, something else. A different sort of sickness moved through the museum. People complained of being very tired. More tired than they should be. They spoke of headaches and feeling faint. Some felt cold, even in the warm rooms. The sick list grew longer. People stayed home from work. The museum was quieter, not so many visitors now. The news had spread. Word gets around, does it not? Whispers in town. Something was going on at the museum. People stayed away. Those of us still working went about our jobs. We tried to ignore it, the feeling in the air. Something was not quite right. You could sense it, like a quiet alarm bell ringing somewhere in the back of your mind. We kept working, but we looked at each other differently. We wondered who would be next. One morning, Sarah did not turn up. Sarah from the front desk. Usually she was always here, always smiling. But not today. No message, no phone call, just not here. Someone phoned her house, no answer. Someone went round to check. They found her in bed. She was not sleeping. She was gone. Just like that. Well, not just like that. It was not normal. The doctor came, the police came. There were questions, many questions. What happened to Sarah? They took Sarah away to the hospital for what they call a post-mortem to find out why. We waited for news. The museum was almost empty now, just a few staff moving about like ghosts. The air felt cold, even with the heating on. The news came back. It was not good news. The doctor spoke about Sarah's organs. He used strange words, words we did not understand. He said they were dry, like they had been without water for a very, very long while. Shrunken, he said, like old fruit left in the sun. Dry? How could that be? She was fine just days before, laughing, talking, drinking tea. Now, dry, it did not make any sense. The doctor looked puzzled. He said he had never anything like it, never in all his years. More people became unwell. Worse, this. Not just tired now, very ill. Some could not get out of bed. They had fevers, very high ones. They were losing water from their bodies, or so it seemed. They were becoming weaker and weaker. Another person died, Mr. Jones from security. A nice old man, always had a kind word. Now he was gone, just like Sarah. They did another post-mortem, the same thing. His organs dry, shrunken like they had aged hundreds of years in days. Fear began to spread properly now, not just unease but real cold fear. People talked in whispers. They spoke about the mummy, about the warnings the historians had ignored, about bad luck and curses. It all sounded silly, of course. But what else could it be? What else could explain this strange sickness, these impossible deaths? I found myself looking at the mummy exhibit, looking through the glass at the still figure lying there. It did not seem to move. It just stayed there, wrapped in its bandages, but something felt different. I could not put my finger on it, just a feeling. I decided to go inside the exhibit room, just to check, to make sure everything was as it should be. It was quiet in there, very quiet. The lights hummed above. The air was still, almost too still. The mummy case was in the center of the room, glass all around it. I walked towards it to look closer, to see if I could see anything unusual, anything at all. And then the case, it was not right. The glass, it was cracked. Not a little crack, big cracks like spider webs all over. The glass was broken, but how? It was thick glass, very strong. How could it break like that? I moved to the front of the case to see inside, to see the mummy, and that's when I saw it properly. The mummy case was not just cracked, it was shattered, broken from the inside. Bits of glass lay on the floor, glass and something else. Wrappings, bandages like the ones on the mummy. They were all over the floor, outside the broken case, leading away from it. A trail of bandages, going towards the door of the exhibit room. I followed the trail, slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. The bandages went to the door, and then out the door, out into the museum. I stepped out of the exhibit room, into the corridor. The trail of bandages continued along the corridor, towards the main doors of the museum, towards the outside world. I followed them. My heart was beating, fast now, too fast. My hands felt cold and clammy. The bandages went past other exhibits, past the dinosaur bones, past the old pottery, past the paintings on the wall, never stopping, just going, a path being laid out. A path leading somewhere. I kept going, following the trail. It turned a corner, went down some steps, into another part of the museum, a part I did not know so well, the storage area, where they kept things not on display. The trail led into the storage area. It was dark here, darker than the rest of the museum. Shelves reached up high, full of boxes and crates. It smelled dusty and old. The air felt colder still. The bandages went deeper into the storage area. Between the shelves, past piles of forgotten things. I followed them, pushing boxes aside, stepping over forgotten relics. The silence here was different, a deeper silence, a silence that pressed down on you, and then the trail ended, just stopped. In a small space between two tall shelves, I looked around. Nothing there, just dust and old boxes and an empty space where something should be. And I looked up at the shelves above, and I saw it, high up on the top shelf, something pale, something wrapped in bandages, not moving, just there, staring down at me. It was not in a case now, not behind glass. It was just there, out in the open, and I could see it properly for the mummy, or what was once a mummy. It was taller than I expected and thinner, so very thin. The bandages were loose in places, and through the gaps I could see skin that was not brown and dry like I expected, skin that was pale, almost white and smooth, too smooth. It looked wrong, everything about it, the way it stood so still, the pale skin, the silence, the air around it felt cold, colder than before. It felt like death was standing there looking at me. I wanted to move back, to leave, to get out of that dark, cold place, but I could not move. My feet felt stuck to the floor, my body felt frozen. I just stood there looking up at it, and it looked down at me. The silence stretched out longer and longer. Nothing moved, nothing changed, just me and it in the dark, cold storage room. And then, very, very slowly, it moved, just a little, just its head, tilting, just a fraction, and I felt something then, a feeling I had not felt before, a feeling that went right to my bones, a feeling that was colder than the air, colder than death itself, a feeling of being watched, being studied, being assessed. And I understood in that frozen moment that I was not the one. It was, and it was ready now, ready for something new. And I was here, and I was dry. My mouth, my throat felt like sand, my skin felt tight, stretched, and I felt very, very tired. The building at night was always quiet. That was the job, keeping it that way. Walking the halls, checking doors, usual night guard stuff. Third night it happened. Down the long corridor near the old offices, I noticed someone. An older man. His clothes were strange, not like anyone who worked here or anyone I'd ever actually spotted before. They looked old-fashioned, like from a history book. He was just standing there. I thought maybe he was lost. Sometimes people got confused, especially at night. Maybe he was an actor. They used this place for filming sometimes during the day. Perhaps he was still in costume, couldn't find his way out. Polite thing to do was to ask if he needed help, so I started walking towards him. He was still just standing there, facing away from me, looking down the corridor. I picked up my pace a little, wanted to get to him before he wandered off somewhere he shouldn't. I was nearly there, only a few steps away. I was about to say something, ask if he was all right. But when I got to where he had been standing, he wasn't there. Just empty hallway. Nothing. That was odd. Really odd. He couldn't have gone far. The corridor ended just a bit further on at a solid wall. No doors, no side exits there. He hadn't passed me. I would have noticed. The hallway was long and straight, good sight lines. I checked the offices on either side of the corridor just in case. All locked, all dark. No one inside. He just vanished, like smoke. I walked back to the security office, needed to make sense of it. Maybe I'd imagined it, but I knew I hadn't. I definitely noticed someone. The old clothes, the way he stood. It was clear as anything. The security cameras, of course, they recorded everything. I could just rewind the tapes, see where he went, see how he disappeared. Easy. I pulled up the feed for the corridor camera, rewound it to just before I'd walked that way on my rounds, watched myself walk down the hallway, watched myself stop, watched myself look around, confused. On the screen I looked like an idiot, staring at empty space. There was no man on the screen. Just the empty corridor, just me walking and then stopping for no reason. But I knew what I'd noticed. He was there. I'd seen him. Made no sense. Cameras didn't lie. Or did they? Maybe there was a blind spot. But the cameras covered everything in the halls. There were no blind spots. I played the footage again. Slower, watched myself walking. Watched myself stop. Watched my head turn to where the man had been. Still nothing on screen but empty space. Then I noticed something else, something really strange. As I stopped, as I turned my head to look at the spot where the man was standing, my shadow moved on the wall. My shadow got longer. It stretched out along the wall towards the empty space in the corridor, as if it was reaching for something that wasn't there, reaching for the place where I'd noticed the old man. But there was nothing there. On the screen, just my shadow, stretching towards an empty wall. But I knew it was stretching towards him, towards the place he had just been. That made my skin crawl. This wasn't right. This was not normal. People don't vanish, and shadows don't reach for empty air. Next night I was on edge. Every shadow seemed deeper, every noise louder. The quiet of the building felt different, more still, like something was holding its breath. I did my rounds, kept looking down the corridors, expecting to notice him again, hoping not to, both at once. And then I noticed him. Again, same place in the hallway, same old man, same strange clothes, standing there, looking down the corridor. This time I didn't move straight away. I stood and watched him from further down the hall, just to be sure I was really noticing him. He didn't move at all. Just stood there, still as a statue. I started to walk towards him again, but this time I was much more careful. I moved very quietly, each step light, trying not to make any sound. I wanted to get close enough to really see him before he disappeared. If he disappeared again, I got closer. He still hadn't moved. I could see him better now. His clothes were dark, old-fashioned coat and trousers. His hair was grey, thin. He was very pale. His face was turned away, so I couldn't see his features properly. I was almost there. Just a few steps now. I held my breath, ready for him to vanish, ready for nothing to be there. And then he turned his head, just slightly, just enough for me to notice his face, his eyes. They were wide, very wide, open too wide, and they were fixed, staring straight ahead, but not really looking at anything in front of him, looking through, and they were completely dark, no white at all, just black. Black eyes, staring without seeing. That's when I stopped, frozen. Didn't want to get any closer. Something was really badly not right. This wasn't an actor. This wasn't a lost person. This was something else, something I didn't understand. He kept turning his head, turned it further now, until he was facing almost directly towards me. Those black eyes fixed on me now, even though they didn't seem to actually notice me. He didn't say anything, didn't move except for turning his head. Just stood there staring with those black, empty eyes. I backed away, very slowly, keeping my eyes on him, not wanting to turn my back, wanting to get away from him, from those eyes. I backed all the way to the end of the hallway, back to the security office, never stopped looking at him. He just stood there watching me go, or seeming to watch. Those eyes were fixed. When I got back to the office, I checked the cameras again. Same thing as before. Empty corridor, no man, just me, backing away slowly. But this time my shadow was even longer, stretched out further down the hallway, further towards the place where the man had been. It was almost reaching the end of the corridor now, reaching for something at the far end, where the wall was. And as I watched the footage, the end of my shadow seemed to flicker, just for a moment, like it touched something. Something unseen, something at the end of the hallway. The next few nights were the same. He was there, in the same place, the old man in the old clothes, standing in the hallway with those black eyes. Each night I noticed him earlier. Each night he seemed a little bit further down the corridor. And each night, when I checked the cameras, he wasn't there. But my shadow was. Stretching out further and further each time, reaching. I started to avoid that corridor, changed my patrol route, stayed away from that part of the building. Couldn't face noticing him again. Couldn't face seeing those eyes. Couldn't face seeing my shadow reaching for nothing. But I knew it wouldn't last. I knew I couldn't avoid that corridor forever. It was part of my job. I had to check all the halls. Last night I had to go down there again. My route took me that way. I tried to go quickly, get it over with, just walk past the end of the corridor, not look down it, just keep moving. But I couldn't. I had to look. I had to know if he was there. I glanced down the hallway, and he was there, further down than before, almost at their very end now, right by the wall. He was facing the wall this time, his back to me, but I still noticed those black eyes, even from behind. I could sense them, sense they were still wide, still staring. Even though he was facing the wall, I stopped, couldn't move, couldn't breathe properly. Something was different this time. Something felt final. I looked at my shadow, on the wall beside me. It was long, longer than ever before, stretched out right down the corridor, all the way to the end, all the way to where the man was standing. And this time my shadow didn't just flicker at the end. This time it reached all the way to the wall, reached the wall, and then went through it. My shadow went right through the solid wall at the end of the corridor, just disappeared into it like it was stepping through a doorway. And then from the other side of the wall, from the place where my shadow had gone, I noticed a sound, very quiet, very faint, but definitely there. A sound like scraping, like nails on stone, scraping from the other side of the wall, coming from the place where my shadow had just vanished, coming from somewhere I couldn't see. And it was getting closer. The crate arrived Tuesday. It was enormous, bigger than any other thing we had taken delivery of at the museum. Rough wood, bound with iron straps. It looked old, very old. Everyone gathered round as they began to prise it open. Inside was another box, this one made of stone, dark stone, covered in strange markings, a sarcophagus. Whispers went around, exciting times at the museum. They got the stone box onto a trolley and wheeled it into the main hall. This was where it would be displayed once it was opened. More people came to watch. It was lifted onto a plinth, quite a grand spot. The curator, Mr. Davies, was beaming. He loved things like this. He told us it was a very important find, something special. The markings were ancient, possibly warnings, but he didn't seem bothered by that. The opening was scheduled for the afternoon. By then a crowd had gathered. Local press, museum staff, members of the public. Everyone wanted to see what was inside. Mr. Davies gave a little speech about the sarcophagus, its history, its mystery. Then, with great care, the lid was to be removed. It looked like it had been sealed shut with wax. Dark, hardened wax covering the join between the lid and the main body of the stone box. They used tools to chip away at the wax seal. Bits crumbled and fell to the floor. The air became different. A strange smell drifted out, not pleasant, sour almost. Some people coughed, others wrinkled their noses. Mr. Davies waved a hand dismissively, said it was just old dust. As they worked on the wax, a small noise, a crack, not loud, but everyone near the sarcophagus turned to look. A thin line like a spiderweb thread appeared on the lid just near one end. It went from one side to the other, a clean split in the stone, then the air. Before it was just a smell, now it was a rush, like something escaping, a gust of air pushing out of the crack. It carried the smell with it, stronger now, fouler. People stepped back. The atmosphere changed completely. Excitement turned to something else, something uneasy. The air felt cold, even though it was a warm day. The opening was paused. Mr. Davies looked uncertain for a moment. He conferred with some of the other experts. He touched the crack, peering at it. After a minute or two, he nodded. Continue. The opening must continue. They went back to chipping away at the remaining wax, working around the crack. Finally, the lid was free. With ropes and pulleys, they began to lift it. It moved upwards, inch by inch. More of the inside was revealed. Darkness, just blackness inside the stone box, and the smell. Stronger still, many people were holding their breath now. The lid was fully removed and placed on another stand nearby. Everyone peered into the sarcophagus. It was deep, very deep, and completely empty. Just black stone at the bottom and the lingering sour smell. Disappointment rippled through the crowd. An empty box, after all that fuss. Mr. Davies seemed taken aback. He leaned over, peering into the depths of the sarcophagus. He used a torch to shine light inside. Still nothing. Empty. He straightened up, a frown on his face. He muttered something about further investigation, about cataloguing, about scientific analysis. The crowd began to disperse. The excitement had gone, replaced by anticlimax. That night I was on duty, night security. It was usually quiet, very quiet. The museum at night is a different place. Empty halls, still exhibits, deep shadows, just the hum of the building systems and the occasional creak of old floors. I did my rounds, checking each hall, each room, everything as it should be, except the main hall, the hall with the sarcophagus. Something felt different there. The air felt colder than in the other rooms, a chill that went right through you. I glanced at the sarcophagus. It stood on its plinth, lid beside it, gaping black hole in the middle. Even empty, it was imposing. I continued my rounds, but I kept thinking about that hall, about the sarcophagus, about the strange smell, about the crack. I told myself it was just my imagination. Museums are always a bit spooky at night. Later, I checked the security monitors, a bank of screens showing feeds from cameras all over the building, everything normal. Hallways empty, exhibits still, no sign of anything unusual. Then I noticed one screen. The camera in the main hall. Static, just grey snow on the screen. Odd. Cameras don't usually fail, especially not new ones like these. I checked the other cameras in the hall, all static. Every single camera in the main hall was showing just grey static. That's not normal. Something was definitely not right. I picked up the radio to call it in, but then I hesitated. What would I say? Cameras are broken. It sounded silly. I decided to go and check it out myself. It was probably just a technical glitch. A power cut or something, easier to check in person than to explain over the radio. I walked back towards the main hall. The corridors were dark, lit only by the emergency lights. Silence except for my own footsteps. As I approached the main hall, I could feel the chill again, even from down the corridor. It was like walking towards a refrigerator that had been left open. I pushed open the doors to the hall and stepped inside. Dark, pitch black. The emergency lights were dimmer in here than in the corridors, hardly any light at all. I fumbled for my torch and switched it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the hall in patches. The sarcophagus stood on its plinth, just as it had been, empty, lid beside it, but something was different. The air, it felt heavier, and the smell, still there, but stronger now, more acrid, like something rotting. I moved closer to the sarcophagus, torch beam dancing across the stone. I circled it slowly, checking everything. Nothing seemed out of place, except the cameras. Still nothing on the monitors, but static. I shone the torch down into the empty sarcophagus. Blackness swallowed the beam. I couldn't see the bottom. It seemed deeper now than it had earlier. Or was that just my mind playing tricks? Suddenly, a noise from the shadows at the far end of the hall, a scrape like stone on stone. My torch snapped towards the sound. Nothing, just shadows. The silence returned, but it felt different now, a silence that listened back. I stood there, torch beam fixed on the dark corner, heart pounding. Nothing moved, just the deep, heavy silence and the sour smell filling my nostrils. After a moment, I told myself it was just the building settling. Old buildings make noises, that's all it was. I decided to check the security camera junction box in the small office next to the hall. Maybe there was a problem with the power supply to the cameras in this one hall. I went to the office, torch beam leading the way. The door was slightly ajar. Odd. I don't remember leaving it like that. I pushed the door open further and stepped inside. Flicked the light switch. Nothing. Power cut in here too. I shone the torch around the small office. Files on shelves, desk with a computer, junction box on the wall. Everything seemed normal. Then I noticed something on the floor just by the desk. A shoe, a brown leather shoe, like the ones Mr. Davies, the curator, always wore. One shoe, lying on its side. Where was the other one, and where was Mr. Davies? A cold dread began to creep over me. Mr. Davies was always meticulous, always neat. He wouldn't just leave a shoe lying on the floor unless something had happened. I moved further into the office, torch beams sweeping around, and then I noticed something else. On the desk, a small pile of dust, not normal dust, dark dust, like dried mud, and a faint, almost invisible trail of it leading from the desk towards the door, toward the main hall. My breath hitched in my throat. I turned slowly and shone the torch beam back into the hall, towards the sarcophagus, and for a split second, just a flicker, something moved in the blackness inside the stone box. Just a suggestion of movement, too quick to be sure, but it was there. Suddenly the radio crackled into life, loud, startling. My hand jumped, nearly dropping the torch. It was base control, calling my name, asking if everything was all right, saying they had lost contact with me for several minutes. I stammered into the radio, trying to sound normal, saying everything was fine, just checking the cameras in the main hall. Technical issue, I would sort it out. Control signed off, but I could sense a note of worry in their voice. I lowered the radio, hand shaking. The silence returned deeper than before, and the smell, it was overpowering now, like death. I wanted to run, to get out of that hall, out of the museum, and never look back. But something held me there, a terrible fascination, a need to know. I took a step back towards the sarcophagus, shining the torch into its black depths. Nothing, just blackness, but the feeling of being watched. It was intense now. Like something was there, just beyond the reach of the light, just beyond seeing. I reached for the radio again to call for backup, to call for help, but as my fingers touched the button, the beam of my torch flickered. Just once, then steadied, but in that flicker, in that fraction of a second of failing light, I definitely, undeniably, unambiguously saw it, inside the sarcophagus. Not blackness, something else, something pale, clawed and reaching up, towards the edge, towards me. Then the torch beam went out completely. Darkness swallowed everything, and the last thing I felt was a cold, desiccated hand gripping my ankle. Dust motes danced in the beam of my torch as I navigated the museum storage. Rows and rows of shelves stretched into the gloom, piled high with forgotten exhibits and dusty relics. My job was straightforward. Get this chaotic space organized. I pushed a trolley loaded with labels and a clipboard, breathing in the dry, earthy scent of aged wood and forgotten things. Rounding a corner, tucked behind a stack of deactivated display cases, I spotted it. An unmarked crate. It was made of dark, weathered wood, held shut with iron bands. No label, no indication of its contents. Curiosity tugged at me. This place held years of forgotten acquisitions. Who knew what oddity lay inside? I wrestled the crate onto my trolley, the wood groaning under its unknown load. Back in my workshop, under the bright fluorescent lights, I set about opening it. The iron bands were stiff, protesting with rusty squeals as I worked at them with a crowbar. Finally, with a loud crack, the lid splintered and gave way. Inside, nestled in packing straw, was something unexpected. Not an artifact, not a geological sample, but an animal. It was preserved, taxidermied, but not like anything I'd ever encountered before. Its form was alien. Its limbs, 4 in total, were too long, too thin, twisted at angles that seemed physically impossible. The fur was the color of dried mud, matted and coarse. Its head was small, almost delicate, perched atop a neck that seemed disproportionately long for its body. And then there were the eyes. They were closed, the eyelids stitched shut in the taxidermist's usual manner. But even like that, there was something deeply unsettling about them. The shape was too round, too large for the small skull. They hinted at something intensely human. I carefully lifted the creature from the crate. It was surprisingly light. The craftsmanship of the taxidermy was excellent, almost too good. The subtle modeling of the form, the delicate setting of the fur, the unnerving precision around the stitched eyelids. It was the work of a master, but a master working on what exactly? This was no known animal, not earthly certainly. I rotated it slowly in my hands, examining every detail. The paws, if you could call them that, ended in elongated digits, tipped with claws that were more like black thorns than nails. The torso was too elongated, the ribcage too shallow. It was a grotesque parody of natural forms. The eyes, even stitched shut, they captivated me. I needed to see them. Using tiny, sharp scissors, I carefully snipped the stitches on one eyelid. It peeled back. The eye beneath was open. It was large, black and glossy, like polished obsidian, and it stared, not in a vacant, lifeless way, but with an intensity that made the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. It was a human eye, set in the head of something utterly not human, a cold, knowing gaze that seemed to see right through me. I quickly restitched the eyelid, a wave of nausea washing over me. This thing was disturbing on a profound level. It was beautiful in its macabre detail, yet utterly repellent in its alien form. I had to know what it was. Science, I thought. Science could explain this. I carefully took a small tissue sample from a hidden part of its underside, sealed it in a sterile vial, and logged it as Unknown Specimen Crate X. The museum had links with a specialist lab, one that dealt with unusual biological samples. I packaged the vial securely and sent it off, requesting a full DNA analysis and species identification. I marked the crate and the creature as pending analysis and pushed them to one side in my workshop, trying to put them from my mind. But the image of that single, staring eye kept returning. Days turned into a week. I busied myself with other tasks, cataloguing bird specimens and repairing damaged reptile displays, but the unknown creature lurked at the edge of my thoughts. Finally, an email arrived from the lab. Urgent. Subject: immediate attention required. Specimen CX. My heart sped up as I opened it. The report was brief, almost curt. DNA analysis inconclusive. No match found in any known database, animal, plant or fungal. The genetic material was anomalous, but it was the attached note, separate from the scientific data, that chilled me to the bone. In stark capital letters it read, "Destroy it immediately. Do not analyze further. Destroy it. Destroy it." This was a scientific lab, not some back-alley disposal service. Why this extreme reaction? What had they found that was so alarming? My curiosity, previously piqued, now burned with a frantic intensity mixed with a growing sense of dread. Something was very, very strange about this creature. And a lab, a place of science and reason, was telling me to destroy it without question. I went back to my workshop, the email still open on my phone. The crate sat in the corner, innocuous looking in the bright light. I approached it cautiously. The creature was still inside, wrapped in its packing straw. I should follow the instructions, shouldn't I? Destroy it, no questions asked, but something held me back. The cryptic warning, the sheer strangeness of the thing. It was too compelling to simply dismiss. I needed to understand. I needed to know what it was or what it had been. I decided to examine it again, this time more closely, more thoroughly. Perhaps there were other clues I had missed. Carefully, I lifted the creature out of the crate once more. The stitched eyelid, the single staring eye. I hesitated. Should I open the other one? I reached for the scissors again. This time my hand trembled slightly. With a quick snip, I released the stitches on the second eyelid. It flicked open. And there it was, the other eye, just like the first. Large, black, human, and fixed on me. Two eyes now, boring into me with that same unsettling intelligence, except something was different, subtly different. In the first eye, there had been a cold curiosity. In this second eye, there was something else, something sharper, hungrier, more focused. A wave of icy dread washed over me, far stronger than before. This was more than just a disturbing specimen. This was something truly awful. The lab's warning echoed in my mind. Destroy it immediately. I knew, with a certainty that went beyond reason, that I had made a grave mistake. I had looked too closely, I had seen too much, and now it had seen me. Panic seized me. I needed to get rid of it now. Before what? I didn't know, but the urgency was overwhelming. I grabbed the crate, intending to seal the creature back inside, to somehow contain it, to destroy it, as instructed. But as I turned back to the corner of my workshop, crate in hand, I stopped dead. The corner was empty. The crate was still there in my hands. The packing straw lay scattered on the workbench, but the creature was gone. Glass shattered. The sound snapped me awake in the security office. A jolt ran through me, pulling me upright in my chair. It was late, the museum still and quiet, except for the low hum of the building's systems. Nothing ever happened at night. We were just there to keep watch, making sure everything stayed as it should until morning. I pushed back from the desk, my heart already beating faster. It had been a big crash, not just a small accident. Something significant had broken. My boots made sharp clicks on the polished floor as I moved out of the office and into the long, silent corridor. The emergency lights glowed red, casting long, reaching shapes across the walls. The quiet was different now, a waiting sort of quiet. The Egyptian exhibit was at the end of the corridor. That area housed the new display, the one that had caused all the fuss. Queen Nefertari the Less, they called her. A minor royal, but her tomb had been remarkably preserved. The archaeologists had been insistent. Leave her be, they'd said. Some nonsense about curses and disturbing the past, but the museum board had seen pound signs, not warnings. And now here we were. As I got nearer, I could see it. The room was dimly lit, bathed in the red emergency glow, and right in the middle, the display case for Queen Nefertari's sarcophagus was a mess of jagged, broken glass. Pieces lay scattered around, reflecting the red light like pools of blood. I moved closer, more cautious now. The air felt different in this room, colder, as if a window had been left open on a winter night, but all the windows were sealed shut. The sarcophagus was there, an ancient stone box, but it was open. The heavy lid, which had needed 3 of us to shift it into place, was tossed aside, lying at an angle on the floor. It looked like something had exploded outwards from inside. I stepped closer again, peering into the sarcophagus. Empty. It was just empty. The Queen's mummy, the one we had so carefully positioned inside just yesterday, was gone, vanished. There was nothing but the linen lining of the sarcophagus, undisturbed, and a faint musty scent, older than anything I'd ever smelled. Panic tightened its grip. This was not right, not possible. The mummy was meant to be inside, secured, protected. This was a security nightmare. I reached for my radio, my fingers clumsy. I needed to call it in, get someone here who knew what to do. Then I noticed something on the floor, just past the broken glass, a thin strip of material. Pale linen, ripped and stained, a dark, sticky red bandage, like from a mummy wrapping. I followed the trail, another piece and another, small torn sections of old linen leading away from the broken display, deeper into the exhibit. The trail of bandages led me between the other displays, past cases of pottery and jewellery, relics of a long-gone time. The museum was a maze of corridors and rooms at night, a place that felt different in the dark, bigger, more echoing. The red emergency lights made everything unfamiliar, turning corners into deep, black voids. The bandage trail went on, leading me further and further from the broken sarcophagus. It snaked around corners, disappearing into the darkness ahead. My heart was pounding now, fear a cold fist in my chest. This wasn't a break-in, this was something else. Another trail of bandages branched off to the left, leading towards the Hall of Kings, the exhibit featuring the larger royal sarcophagi. I hesitated. Should I follow it? Should I go back, call for help? But what if whatever had broken out was still here? What if it was moving around in the dark somewhere in the museum right now? I moved after the bandages again, stepping carefully. The silence was complete now, except for my own breathing and the faint drumming in my ears. The air was colder still, a deep, bone-chilling cold that seemed to seep from the stone walls themselves. The scent was stronger too, musty and something else, something acrid, unpleasant. The Hall of Kings was a grand, high-ceilinged room dominated by massive stone sarcophagi. They were empty, of course, just display pieces, but in the red light they looked like slumbering giants. The bandage trail continued through this room, winding between the huge stone boxes. Then I saw another guard, David. He was slumped against one of the sarcophagi, his back against the cold stone. He was facing away from me, head tilted at an odd angle. "David!" I called out, my voice too loud in the silence. He did not answer. I moved closer, stepping around the edge of the nearest sarcophagus, and then I stopped. My breath caught in my throat. David was there, but he wasn't moving. He was slumped against the stone, yes, but his uniform was ripped, torn to shreds, and around him and on the sarcophagus behind was more of the dark, sticky red. I didn't need to go any nearer to see. David wasn't just hurt, he was gone, taken apart. And amongst the mess of his uniform scattered around him were more bandages, torn, bloodied mummy wrappings. I backed away slowly, my eyes wide, my mind struggling to understand. This wasn't real, this couldn't be real. But David was there, or what was left of him, and the trail of bandages was leading further into the museum. I turned and ran back the way I'd come, back through the Hall of Kings, back past the empty display cases, back towards the security office. I had to get out. I had to call for help. This place wasn't safe. Something was loose in the museum, something ancient and terrible. I ran blindly, not caring about the noise, about anything but getting away. I burst back into the corridor, heading for the office, for the outside door. But then I tripped. My foot caught on something and I went down hard, sprawling onto the cold stone floor. Pain shot up my leg. I gasped, pushing myself up, scrambling to my feet, and then I looked down at what I had tripped over, another trail of bandages. But this trail wasn't on the floor. It was moving. The bandages were twisting, writhing, as if they had a life of their own. They were coming from the shadows at the end of the corridor, snaking towards me across the floor, pulled by something unseen. And as they moved, they left a trail of red behind them, a glistening smear on the polished stone. I tried to move, to get up, to run again, but my leg wouldn't take my weight. It was twisted, useless. I was trapped on the floor, watching as the bandages grew longer, reached further, coming closer and closer. The musty, acrid scent filled the air now, overpowering, sickening, and in the dim red light I could just make out shapes forming amongst the bandages, a vague, shadowed outline taking shape in the darkness, moving with a purpose I didn't understand, but instinctively knew was deadly. The bandages were right in front of me now, reaching, grasping. They coiled around my leg, cold and strangely strong, pulling. I tried to scream, but no sound came out, just a choked whimper. The shadowed shape moved closer, and the last thing I registered before everything went dark and cold was the feeling of ancient linen closing around me, and the sharp, tearing pain as something began to pull me apart. By morning, when the day staff arrived, the museum doors were unlocked, just as they should be. The building was quiet, still. Everything seemed normal, except for the faint trails of torn, bloodied bandages they found, scattered throughout the Egyptian exhibit, leading to every corner of the museum and then stopping, just stopping, as if whoever or whatever had left them had simply vanished with the rising sun, and nobody could explain where they'd come from or where they had gone.